Hi everybody, Tim Mix here, and today I want to explain you the ACES data workflow in DaVinci Resolve after the intro. Okay, in this video I will not explain the whole ACES workflow for DaVinci Resolve or Baselite. The intention of this video is to show you some problems and facts which can occur if you are working in ACES. And of course, some tips too. If you are interested in a general workflow explanation, practical, I will do one in the next week. So in this moment, this is the moment to subscribe to get informed and stay tuned. And I will link to my last tutorial in the upper right corner. And as you should already know, ACES uses an ultra-wide internal color space, which is linear. In this video, I will explain everything in context with DaVinci Resolve. So to be able to follow along, I start by explaining the general DaVinci Resolve ACES workflow, which you can see as a schematic here. In general, it shows you the typical ACES pipeline, but as you can see, there are two magenta rectangles and all others in blue. These two magenta, let's call them nodes, represents the file operations one for input and one for output as a delivery. So first thing to understand with this workflow is all data which are written into a file are typically stored in the ACES 2065-1 color space, which is an AP0 color space. I explained it in my last video. That's very important to understand because here the misunderstanding starts often. Then we have the IDT, RRT, and ODT nodes, which you already know from the generic ACES pipeline. In general, the IDT is an input data transform, which encodes the media data into the ACCC or ACCCT color space, and the ODT is an output data transform, which decodes the data for monitoring and delivery, like Rec 709, for example. In DaVinci, you can adjust both in the project settings. Here, in the color management tab, here is the next confusing fact. If you choose Rec 709, for example, in the ODT, because you want to deliver for a Rec 709 display format, then you should use a Rec 709 calibrated monitor. This is represented by this node here. So that is really important to understand. You don't have to calibrate a monitor or display for ACES because it's not a display referred color space, but you have to use one for your master color space, a calibrated monitor. And these are two totally different things. So keep this in mind. Okay, I think you have the point. The next very important thing is that you should know that you don't use the ACES 2065 color space if you are working in ACES. You have to understand that ACCC and ACCCT are the working color spaces, also called AP1. Remember, ACES 2065 is the AP0 and ACCC and CCT are the AP1. Those are not the same color spaces. And here is another very important thing to understand. The AP0 color space, which is our the AP1 is our working color space, is very similar to the BT2020 color space. So it's a restricted color space, and it is a log color space, or to be correct, ACCC is a log encoded and ACCCT is a quasi-log encoded, but you can use both without worrying about this technical difference because you have to handle both as a log encoded color space. So as you can see here in the workflow scheme, the ACCC and CCT working color spaces are encoded during the input transformation and after your creative work before the RRT decoded back. And that's really important to keep in mind. And what does that mean? In ACES, all file interchanges are based on the AP0 color space, which is a ACES 2065 color space, scene, referred, and linear. But in the color grading working color spaces, ACC and ACES-CCT, we are using the restricted ACES color space AP1, lock encoded, but scene referred too. So this is one of the most misunderstandings if it comes to color grading in ACES, especially in DaVinci Resolve. So what do we learn so far? In DaVinci Resolve, we are working in the AP1 color space of ACES, which is the restricted color space and similar to the BT2020. But it's not linear as a BT2020, it's a lock-encoded space. And here is a confusion, or here the confusion starts again if you don't know what you are doing. Let's move on. Okay, here is another very important tip you always should keep in mind. Color grading in ACES can introduce a lot of artifacts and grain too. That's the bad news. But you can handle it very well if you understand the following. First, in ACES, you should avoid negative values in the primary colors. So please take an eye on your scopes and use a cursor, or better, an eyedropper with turned on RGB values on your view in DaVinci Resolve, so to see if there are negative values of your green, red, or blue colors. The reason for this is that such negative values are out of gamut colors. On this graphic, you can see the ACES 2061 in comparison to the ACES CG color space, which is, by the way, linear too, and the Rec 709, DCI-P3, and BT2020 color space. No cameras or display technologies in use are capable of reproducing all the colors that the human eye can see or that ACES can encode. Yet working with this much color data has real advantages, but some downsides too, just like this negative values, especially for bluish magenta-ish colors. The next thing is that if you are color grading in ACES in DaVinci Resolve, you should avoid the lift, gamma, and gain tools, shortly LGG. There's nothing wrong with these tools, and the math behind doesn't change if you are using ACES, but these tools are designed for linear color spaces, not for log footage. And here the confusion starts again, especially by beginners. Thankfully, I discussed this topic shortly with a very kind guy, Vincent, a CGI pro, who draw attention to this LGG problem. And finally, it's really quite simple if we understand that the primaries behaves as always, as usual, but in ACES, under the hood, in this lock-encoded and scene-referred AP1 color space, which is the ACCC or ACES-CCT color space, the values are transformed in a different way as usual. And it's not linear, like Rec 709 or Rec 2020, for example. So this seems to be the reason why the LGG, lift, gamma, and gain, seem not behaving as usual. I did a video about this issue, but I have to correct my words a bit in this video. It's not the tools which are working wrong, it's in the ACES process. Or in other words, the AP1 color space, which is used in ACES-CC or CCT, is lock-encoded. And that's really important to understand. And what does it mean for working with the primaries if grading in ACES? Here's the answer. The primaries are designed to work with linear color spaces, while the log wheels are designed to work with log-encoded data. That's a simple fact. What I explained wrong in my last video, or the video color grading in ACES with primaries, was that the lift, gamma, and gain works all the same, and that's wrong. The LGG behaves as usual, but the values in ACES, AP1 reacts totally different through the transformations, so that the math behind the primaries wheels, doesn't get the response as expected. And that's the next thing to keep in mind. if you want to get a response as usual in the LGG, lift, gamma, and gain, then you can follow my workaround in the mentioned tutorial, but it's wrong in the basic sense of ACES. That's not a true ACES workflow. The better and more correct way is to use a log wheels instead, or the curves. And what Blackmagic says in context of using the ACES transform FX in DaVinci is the following. The ACES CC AP1 timeline space setting is also good for workflows where you want to use conventional LUTs that were designed for Rec 709 workflows using the Resolve FX ACES transform plugin, which over a series of 3 nodes lets you transform the image from ACES to 701, apply a Rec 709 designed LUT, and then convert the image from 709 back to ACES. Okay, that means that this plugin correctly transforms back and forth. What Blackmagic also said is this. This plugin does ACES transforms correctly using the transform specified by the Academy, whereas the color transform plugin does not transform to the ACES color space colorimetrically. So is my workaround of my tutorial about this primaries and ACES context correctly? The answer is clear. Yes and no. Yes, this plugin transforms back and forth correctly. But no, the LGG tools doesn't work all the same. They behave as expected. So to come to an end, you can use this workaround if you want. It's not totally wrong. It works, and it works correctly, but you could get an issue with this method. Sadly, Blackmagic doesn't really care about ACES. It's an open secret. And I don't understand this, because if Blackmagic would do DaVinci and Fusion would participate a lot. No one can ignore ACES longer in the future, but that's another story. So let's leave this topic for now. What's important too in context of possible differences with some tools in DaVinci is the offset. The offset behaves as usual, but in the primaries you will notice that the response is more like a gain. So you should keep this in mind and be careful if you use it. So in summary, be very careful if you use the primaries and ACES, because the values change differently in such a log encoded large color space than in a linear. And I want to give you a very important tip. In the project settings, be sure to uncheck use S-curve for contrast in the project settings if using the log wheels. Why? The S-curve works and makes sense in display referred color spaces, but not so much in log encoded color spaces. So for ACES, you will get better results. And another thing you should know is that if you set a project to ACES and your ODT to Rec 709, and you then want to apply a VFX in Fusion, you will get problems caused by high saturated colors, and you probably will get artifacts and posterizations and such things. I recommend to avoid simply high saturated colors in combination with Fusion if you are working in ACES. And now I will definitely drive you crazy. Seaten your fast belt and close your eyes. And now listen to me. ACES-CC and ACES-CCT are log-encoded working color spaces, also called AP1. That's what you learned so far. But there's more. Much more. And it will shoot the gem out of your brain, because ACES gives you a great working color space for VFX too. It's called ACES CG, and it's also the AP1, but it's not log encoded. It's linear. Isn't that crazy? We have the AP1, which is a working color space for color grading if you use ACES, but this color space exists twice. Log encoded and linear. Definitely one of the main reasons why many people don't understand what ACES really is. And no, the Academy isn't crazy. All that makes totally sense, and it's genius. Why? Do you remember what I explained in my last tutorial about understanding ACES? ACES is a color management system with a base concept to give you color consistency, right? And what do we have with the AP1? A color space for color grading, the ACCC and CCT, and a color space for CGI, which is mostly linear. But here again, the same color space, both correctly mapped to the big brother AP0, which is a ACES 2065-1 color space. You remember, this totally crazy ultra-wide color space, larger than the human vision. So what do we have? Color consistency, just with the same AP, the AP1, once log and once linear encoded. This is so important to understand, so please keep this in mind. Okay, there are some more important facts and more downsides too if you are using ACES, not only in DaVinci, I mean in general. But in my opinion, it's a question of the perspective if I call it downside or an important fact to know. Because lastly, you will never get something for free in life. And everything has its two sides. I guess you know what I mean. I hope I could help you to improve your understanding in ACES. And if you want to see more content like this, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. Thanks for watching and listening too. The summer is near. You all a great time. Bye.